Welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, your host and president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. Welcome to the first episode of this season. To kick off this season, we're going to step back and ask a simple question. What does impact require now? And the answer starts with execution. Across the public sector, teams are delivering critical work in environments defined by competing priorities, oversight, staffing constraints, and constant change. Good intentions are not enough. Clear structure, shared accountability, and measurable progress really matter. Today, we're going to focus on how work moves from planning through delivery and what it takes to keep projects advancing when conditions are less than ideal. And today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues and close friends from Public Knowledge. We have Naomi Snodgrass, Vice President of Management Consulting, and Allison Ward, our Programs Implementation and Evaluation Practice Director, both of which have been with us on the podcast before, so welcome back. And both of them bring expertise in leading large, complex projects. Projects where timelines shift, where stakeholders' demands evolve, and where the expectations are super high. So thank you both for being here today. We're going to start today in kind of grounding us in your experience and perspective as it relates to projects. Allison, if you don't mind starting, let's talk about how your work in public sector projects have shaped the way that you think about project management today.
Yeah, I think thinking back to like working in the public sector and now working with clients in the public sector, thinking about focusing on realistic parameters, like timelines are shifting, money can be short, demands from legislatures are very real, and staying within those is really, really important. And being responsible and beholden to taxpayers, legislators, stakeholders, and just kind of keeping that in mind, even now, not sitting in that seat, but working with people sitting in that seat. I also think about how important transparency is and being transparent with what we're doing for our clients and with our clients, and making sure that we're sharing kind of every step of the way so that they know what we're doing in the background, kind of in between meetings, in between conversations, so that they can then share that again with their stakeholders, partners, leadership, things like that. And then just that responsibility to our clients and to their clients, whether that's children and families or other stakeholders and partners, and just being mindful of that responsibility throughout the project.
Awesome. Naomi, what is it, how has your work in projects in the public sector shaped the way that you think about project management today?
I've had a boomerang career in the sense that I've come back and forth a few times. One time working in public sector for, as somebody who could be a client, also work in a private sector organization. And then as a consultant. So I think that you highlighted something that I'm going to jump all over to, Allison, which is buy-in is so important. You mentioned that, stakeholders. I think it looks a little bit different almost, and that may be a controversial statement in the public sector because of some of the things you mentioned around the broad swath of stakeholders who are invested in the outcome and the need to really answer to all of them, right? And so I think that is one of the things that really has impacted me in thinking around project management. We can't just go in with our checklist. You have to really almost pause, slow down, take a minute and say who is truly impacted and how do we communicate with them, and with the transparency that you also talked about. So I'm really glad you went first on this, Allison.
I think that buy-in is such a mixed thing because I think of, we in the public sector, I think the change is constant, but also the comfort with change, I think, is a little less, lots of risk aversion, understandably. But there's also some really passionate people. So you get a little bit of this like risk aversion, but also some like really passionate emotion, right? Like connected into projects and change, which I think is the unique combo that can make it challenging, really challenging. Okay, well, with both of your experience and whichever one of you wants to go first, what consistently creates friction or slows momentum in projects?
One of the things that jumped right to mind when I saw this question was lack of clarity around decisions and who decision makers are. That definitely causes friction, or just it makes things just not kind of pause, like what's happening, And so clarity around decisions, and I know we're going to probably talk about that later in this podcast, is kind of a key factor. But if there's not just a clear statement, and I don't know why that is sometimes in public sector projects, sometimes we don't know who the person who has the voice that is able to say it, or we're still waiting for one bit of permission, or one piece of the decision isn't clear. So there has to be a way around some of those things to get the clarity that's needed, so you can kind of move beyond the friction.
Yeah, you can have all the right people, right, and have a really well-resourced project, but that can still get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
Allison, what do you think? What creates friction or slows momentum?
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts on this, and I think competing priorities really can get in the way, or lack of understanding of the actual need when you're thinking about kind of people who are on the ground, working with stakeholders, working with families, and then people who are in like middle management or leadership and maybe not seeing those needs on a day-to-day basis. So having those competing priorities, and then kind of with that, a disagreement on the appropriate approach and kind of how to go about solving those problems. And kind of along with that, I'm just going to keep building on this, like not using data to say, here's what our issue is and here's how we can fix it. So kind of all of that snowballing together. And then I totally agree with Naomi. I also think just about like, along with the decision making, just sometimes not having full leadership support when you've got the people who are on the ground saying, here's where the issue is, here's how we need to fix it, and having that talked about, and being able to have leadership kind of respect that expertise and go with the data and be able to solve the issue.
Yeah, I love that. So as we think about project management, I think back to like my time with PMI, like studying for that project management exam. And we think of that being like the best practices, right, around project management. And I think traditional project management, I think it often like focuses almost exclusively, right, on like plans and tools and documentation, like, steps of project management, which is important, 100% important. But what I've learned in practice, right, both before doing project management and consulting at PK and after, is that teams often struggle with a lot more of the people issues on projects than the actual steps. I think of things like decision clarity, which you talked about, Naomi, right? Coordination between people and stakeholders, which you talked about, Allison. Follow through, right? It's these people problems or adaptive challenges that get in our way. So from your perspective, where do you think that conventional project management approaches kind of fall short in your kind of real world environments? And what tends to break down first when projects start getting off course?
I think that traditional approach that you talked about doesn't leave a ton of room for creativity and innovation. There are, very specific steps, and I'm thinking back to studying for the PMP too, like very specific phases and tasks, and all of those are really important. But we also need to be able to pause and think, where can we be creative? Where can we be innovative within the parameters that we have and within the steps that we have? And be able to use that passion we talked about, be able to use perspectives of people with lived experience to be able to say, okay, how can we try something new? And I think that traditional approach doesn't always allow us to pivot when we need to do that. And I think generally in my experience, where things break down is in that communication. It's like, we're going to try something new, or we're going to, test this out based on data that we have, and not having the conversations around a new rationale or a new approach, or being creative and being able to have those conversations and get buy-in, I think is where a lot of the breakdown can happen.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Naomi, what do you think?
You mentioned also that, typical project management emphasizes these things like the steps, the plans, the schedules, the checklists, if you will. And that alone, when people just only rely on those, that's number one mistake, because you think you're all set and you're not. So that's an obvious. And I think in its place, you're missing things like alignment of maybe groups that are working on separate tracks. They're following the list, they're following the checklist, but where's the alignment? Are we working toward the mission? And I think I'm going to weave that concept in a lot during this conversation today around what's the purpose of the why we're doing this, remembering that at all times. In the real world environments, you have time constraints, like Allison mentioned. You have a well-resourced project could be well-resourced only in budget, but maybe not in number of people or things like that. So that real world is messy and challenging. So the things that, like permissions, alignment, understanding that change is happening, but not everything may need to be a full blown change. Some things just have to happen. You can't fight it. Some of them you get more input than others. So all those people things that Stacey talked about break down, and then they cause like a trickle effect of things for the project later down the line. So just thinking that you're set with those traditional approaches, while they're important, is not going to help.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what I want to talk about now is kind of our project management methodology, which we call DitDah. And I think, what I was kind of surprised by when I came to public knowledge is just the focus, right, on people and our ability to kind of keep projects on task in ways that I hadn't seen before. And actually, I saw that when I was working on a project with public knowledge before I came there too. Naomi, you and I, and Melissa Davis, if you'll remember, kind of worked on kind of getting this into a more repeatable, scalable methodology, right? Something that wasn't just the magic of the people that we had at the company who, have been doing this for far longer than I have, but an ability to actually combine those practices, right, with the people and how teams work together into this methodology. And I don't want to talk about the details of that methodology today, but I do want to talk about kind of how it shows up in the work that we do and the projects that we do and in our practice. So when teams are working under our DitDah methodology, what changes in how decisions are made?
I'll take that first. I would like to say that there's a focus on the best or the right way to get input from people who have to provide input. And we actually call that intentionally collaborating, because what that says is we do need to get your input, and we want people's decisions. We want all the decisions to reflect the right level of input, but not everything has to have everybody's voice. And sometimes input is truly just input, and we're very clear about that. Thank you for the input, but the leadership is going to, then check it against the mission and move forward. So decisions are made not necessarily as quick as people might like, but they're made with intentional collaboration and getting input from the right people in a really kind of clear way, which I think is a big value in projects.
Allison, anything else that you've seen changes in how kind of decisions are made?
Yeah, I think there's that mutual understanding of like, this is the process we're using and kind of this is how we're getting to our answers. And I agree with Naomi, like it's clear kind of when people are giving input, when people are decision makers, and people go in with that understanding. So you know where your voice fits and how you're contributing, and just being able to have that clarity from the beginning, I think is really important and really helpful.
Well, and so important in, I think, another piece of this that we push that you mentioned earlier, Allison, is getting a user's perspective or lived expertise perspective, like understanding the stakeholders that are involved and kind of where their perspective is. Again, it doesn't mean they're making the decision, but making sure that the decision makers are aware of the impact and, the preferences and kind of what that looks like. And I think what's magical about this process, when I saw it a long time ago, 15 years ago now, probably more than that, is just the clarity that it brings, but also how quickly you can get people who have very disparate opinions kind of get their opinions out on the table and bring them together. And it's something I've never seen anywhere else. For sure.
It's a great process. Can I add one more thing to that? I think the special part that sometimes is overlooked, but anybody can say we're just going to be speaking the truth and be realistic. But truly, we actually make it okay. It's one of our foundational principles of DitDah. It's like we can have these decisions, but they have to reflect what is truly possible. Obviously, the creativity piece that you mentioned, Allison, I love that you mentioned that. But being realistic and truthful and having decisions reflect how to get to that step makes it actually possible to have success.
Yeah. Well, grounded in reality and transparent about what those guardrails are or what's possible. Okay, next question is just how does the DitDah methodology help teams stay aligned when priorities or when leadership or when something shifts mid-project? Because that never happens, right?
And I think you kind of always have this project plan, this process to go back to. So you can say, like, yes, we have this urgent request from the legislature to respond to this. Like, how does that fit in our scope? What conversations are we going to have with our client to make sure that we can still meet this need? And we can go back to kind of working through our steps of our process and having the format with our sync calls and our targeting calls to be able to have those conversations and move through that even as those needs change.
I think that's really all about our focus on healthy project teams, which is, again, sometimes in those moments where leadership may shift or something's happening, it's a bump in the project, we take almost, it feels like a detour sometimes, or a little bit of a slowdown and attend to what is happening on the team. It could be around, trust. It could be around, is there conflict happening? How can we go through it and turn this into healthy conflict? So taking, that approach is really always there. And there are toolkits available for project managers and trainings that are out there that really allow that to be funneled into a healthy way when those things happen on a project.
Yeah, I agree with both of the points that you made. I think the only other thing that I would add to it is I think that one thing that helps with leadership shifting in the middle of a project, we've put so much focus on making sure that we're getting all of the concerns and everyone bought into the plan, and that it's well documented, about what the vision is and the why, and, the actual case for why this change is happening, that a change in leadership often doesn't really disrupt the project. I mean, it can, like if there's a funding issue or something, but I think it's so well documented, everyone's on board, right, that it's really hard to shift it, even as a new leader, when you're kind of halfway down the road, because you come in and there's so much resistance to that because everyone's already there. Everyone's at the table. There's no one sitting there going, oh, we never should have done this, or we should have done it this way. Because I do think we do a really good job in that kind of visioning and setting up the plan at the beginning and getting everyone's voices out on the table, as well as documenting it along the way, right? It is really hard to kind of shift that plan.
Some part of that is around sponsorship. Like sometimes a leader who's really strong can deal with a sponsor that may not be out there having, the biggest voice that we need. And if the leadership changes in that context, that's where there's a risk, right? If that new leader doesn't necessarily know how to.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a little bit of a curve on the project management road to measures. So let's talk about our 4 core measures. So we use public knowledge 4 core measures, which are impact, budget, timeline, and return on investment. And we use that to kind of guide decisions, right, throughout the project life cycle. We use it with clients to make sure that they know that we're on track and that we're having the impact and the return on investment that they're looking for. But for us too, it's about driving, right, like driving change, driving impact. So let's talk about how we use these beyond just reporting, because obviously we report on them both internally and externally. But how do you see how the 4 core measures have changed the conversations that teams are having while they're actually delivering the project work?
Yeah, I think it helps us focus on that impact, which, being one of our core values is really important, and it allows us to operationalize that and focus on how we're making an impact for our clients and how they can make an impact for their stakeholders or partners or their own clients, and be able to put like a discrete, concrete point on it. Here's the thing that we're impacting. Here's the measure. Here's the price, savings, or whatever it might be, that this is the concrete thing that we can point to and say, we made a difference on this project. And similar with return on investment, like we have examples of saying, we've helped states save $2 million a quarter with revamping a process. And so being able to be really specific and really concrete about how we've been successful or where we may have fallen short, being able to kind of focus the project effort on that and measure against that. Schedule and budget, we've been measuring forever, and those are really specific things that we've been measuring from the beginning with project management. But now we're able, I think, to point to that and show how that's contributing to our success or our shortfall, and being able to be really specific and having conversations about it.
Well, and that course correction is so important, right? Like our clients are using taxpayer dollars, right? And so like making sure that there's a return, right, on the work that we're doing that's hopefully far more than what they're spending for our work, but also, we want to, if it's not working, we want to be able to fix it. We don't want to keep doing something that's not working, right? So this kind of iterating or failing quickly or understanding what's not working is perhaps just as important as what is working, so that we can shift into something that might work. Naomi, what do you think? How have you seen the 4 core measures change the conversations that teams are having.
I'm going to add, really adding on to what Allison said, but it is about impact. It's around, is the desired impact really reflected in the way the project is proceeding? So one of the changes that we're really seeing that's exciting to me in project teams here at PK, as well as with our clients, are getting that thought around what is the impact at the beginning of the project. It's kind of like an enhanced version of what's the vision and mission. Why are we doing the project and what is the impact we want to have? Because then you can start building the data that you need to get into that process, make sure you're able to answer that question, of key points in the project, right? It just says why we're doing it is so important. And the impact is something we start thinking about at the beginning of the project and, can move. We've had clients where they said, hey, based on what's happening now in our world, we're going to, focus a different impact right now and change things. But it doesn't mean you're not still doing important work, and you're still doing it with all the things that Stacey and Allison mentioned around transparency, being accountable to the dollars that you have that are taxpayer dollars and things like that.
I think it also, it helps us. We have clients come to us and say, here's our problem, or here's the issue we're facing. And with having these conversations about impact and return on investment, sometimes we've been able to say, is that really the problem? And give kind of that feedback to say, let's try this, because we think if we fix this thing, it's going to impact this other thing. And I think we've always been doing that, but now we just have a shared language around it. And just being able to use these measures and use the data to show clients, here's where we think, based on our experience, what we've seen in other states or other agencies, this is what we think was really driving this issue.
Well, and I think, similarly to kind of why a client would want to bring in someone externally, it is something we've always been doing, and we've always been able to use lessons learned from one client to another client. But I think this allows us to do it in a much more quantitative and just deep way, right? Because it's not just hey, I, Stacey, learned this on this project and can bring it to this project, which is how we've always done it, right? For the last, 4 years. But it's a way of okay, not only did I see it, but it's measured, it's quantifiable, it's clear. The client saw it. We all agree that this worked here and this will likely work in this next project that maybe I'm not even a part of, right? So it allows us to take it other places without the one person being the linchpin, which is always historically how we were, just because of size, right? And also just the similarities and differences between clients. Whereas now I think it's going to be easier, right? It's going to be easier to pass that data and information and lessons learned between demonstration sites, between projects, and course correct quicker, or perhaps not even go down a road of something that we know doesn't work. Okay, well, let's talk just a bit about leadership and accountability. So one theme, and I think, Naomi, you brought this up earlier, right, that runs through kind of effective projects is clarity, right, and accountability. And so I'm curious what you two think, what role do leaders play in creating clarity and accountability while still allowing some flexibility for teams to kind of adapt as things change and be creative and be innovative? How does a leader balance those and drive that?
You can think about that from different perspectives that I've had, where I've either been in a leadership role or been on a project where there's a project leader and just and kind of organizational leadership. So the leader is such an important voice for almost being a cheerleader. And I don't want to use that word in a super, unauthentic way. Let's pretend you're on an airplane and you're looking at the steward and the flight attendant's face in a bump. And if they're looking confident, you are good. You are fine. But if they are starting to do their rosary beads, that's worrisome. So that's what the leader does to the team. Seriously.
Right now, I am literally in my head on a plane listening to Pentatonic's cheerleader song that is now stuck in my brain. So I haven't paid attention to anything you just said. No, just kidding. No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
You do. You look at others around you. It's a temperature check. Yeah. Yeah.
Looking and think of yourself when you've looked to leaders and you look at them and they are, they're charging for, they have the vision clear and they're saying it multiple times and reiterating why we're doing it. That frees you up to do the stuff. It frees you to feel like I can keep moving forward on this and I can contribute my ideas and be creative. So that is just super important to me. And I think leaders sometimes don't have time for that because they're bogged down in all the details and the people coming and yapping and this and that. So that's just, I think, really kind of a key thing.
Yeah. Agreed. Allison?
Kind of building on that, I think, and we've talked a little bit about trust already, but leaders trusting their teams to employ their expertise and kind of that passion that we've talked about and their ways of working to say like, hey, I think this is how we should solve this problem. And leaders saying, great, let's try it. Like we've got data behind it. We've got people with experience behind it. We've got the flexibility to try these things. Let's test it out. And if it doesn't work, we can pivot. We can try something different. But just being able to trust their teams to kind of do what they were brought in to do and serve their populations, I think is also really powerful.
Well, and if you've done a good job at the beginning of the project of articulating what it is you want to move the needle on, right? What impact you want to have? What are your goals? What does success look like? Like whatever it is you want to call it, right? But if you've done that well from the very beginning and you're clear about that and you don't waver on that, right? Then yeah, how you get there, right? What road you take or how you meander or any of that really is going to be up to kind of innovation and changing conditions. But being super clear at the beginning about that is the key to that. I don't know what percentage of projects do you think do that well? Would you say that you've worked in?
The ones that do stand out. So I guess it's not high.
I was going to say, I think I could probably count on like less than one.
Yeah. And that's why just a reminder about that and constantly getting people back to that is important.
Okay. Well, another reflection question alongside that is if you look across projects right now, current projects, and also just kind of the environment that our clients are in right now, what do you think teams need more of right now in order to succeed?
For me, I kept thinking about trust. Like we just need to be able to trust that each other have the client's best interest in mind. And for the client teams, I think they need to trust their mission and that each of them is committed to their mission so that kind of we all have the shared vision and buying into that, believing in it, and constantly coming back to it and just trust that kind of we're all doing that together and we're making decisions for the projects because we have the shared vision. We're trying to make this impact, this desired impact that we've set from the beginning, and then having the flexibility to do that, like to try it out, to take risks and see if things work.
Naomi, what do you think teams need more of right now?
In addition to the clarity that we talked about, and I kind of lean into trust also, but around that, it's why is trust necessary? Because it gives space to have healthy conflict and to get to a place of we can have open communication, like you've mentioned a few times, Allison, or constructive feedback. Yeah, we're not getting out of this podcast without the word feedback. Okay, active listening. Those are like simple skills, but those things are important. And I'm going to add one other thing, which is because things happen fast and there's sometimes these demands that sometimes come from up above and you just don't know what happened. Why are they there? I think we need to also be okay with just giving, grace and forgiveness to each other when things go wonky and to ourselves, right? And to ourselves. And so I think teams always could use that just as a reminder and more of that. And when we see that, it's really great.
Great. It's fun. Yeah. Those are the days that are really fun. Yeah. Okay. Well, somewhat related is what one shift kind of in practice or in mindset do you think would immediately improve how project work moves forward?
This is going to be an ironic answer for me, but I think being willing to take risks. It's one of the things I'm, working on professionally. Like personally, I'm all for it. I'll jump out of a plane tomorrow, but professionally, it's definitely one of my growth areas. And I think just being willing to take the risk, try something new, because again, I think we're so focused on this is taxpayer money. We've got to be beholden to these budgets and to stakeholders. But we can do that in creative and innovative ways and still get people what they need by trying something new and not falling back on this is how we've always done it. Maybe there's a new way to try it that's going to be more exciting, a better return on investment, better outcomes, engaging more people, like whatever it may be, just being willing to take the risk and having the flexibility to do it.
My answer here is I was trying to think of what does it mean to say a shift in mindset or kind of a new practice. And I I think it's something that like simple as this, which is even if you are maybe not managing a huge project, or it's almost like to think project based around every task. Like think of things as a project, conduct things as a project with, kind of a beginning and an end, or, kind of a scope, understanding what being clear on the scope. Just if you think of things as a project, you don't get stuck in what's happening here. You can kind of just move forward and then move to the next thing and kind of do the moving around and adjusting that you talked about, Allison, as well.
The thing that came to mind for me today, which interestingly came up, we were doing an interview earlier today, and one of our colleagues shared that one of her least favorite types of people to work with are ones that are behind a veil. And it's been like, I don't know why, but I think just because it was visual, it's been sticking in my brain today, but brings me back. And like this one shift or this one mindset shift for me is clarity, right? Clear is kind, transparency. I think often leaders can get stuck behind some of that veil of like, well, they won't understand my decision if they don't understand the guardrails I'm in or the political pressure I'm in or the stakeholders that I'm dealing with. And I think trusting that people will understand or trusting people with that information does help kind of just free up, right? Leaders from feeling like they're constantly navigating this like secret labyrinth, right? And so I just keep coming back to, I say clear is kind with feedback, but I think, being clear is kind when it comes to how we're doing this work too, because I think we underestimate people in thinking that they can't understand complex environments or they can't understand, data points that don't agree. I think they can. And I think there's so much freed from coming like behind that veil and just saying, here's the situation that we're dealing with, right? Here it is, all out on the table. Welcome to the mess, right?
Yeah.
And here's how we're going to move forward. And here's why I think that shift, I think, is really freeing.
And that is huge. That's huge. Yeah. I've seen you do that, Stacey. It's great. And it makes a difference. I mean, it really makes a difference.
It does.
It does. And I think and I feel like I just keep going back to trust, but I feel like that creates psychological safety for other people then to say like, well, here's everything I'm bringing to the table too. So like, here's where I'm getting hung up, or here's what I don't understand, or here's why I think we need to try this. And it just gives people the freedom to also be really honest and transparent.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, we're getting towards the end here. So I have one more question for you is just kind of, is there one thought or one phrase that you would leave today with leaders who are managing complex projects right now? Like they're in the thick of it, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed. What would you say to them, or what thought would you like to leave for them?
I would say take care of yourselves and take care of your people. Like there's so much that we're all juggling at work, outside of work, and so much we're having to react to and take on that I think, again, like we've talked about with trusting yourself, trusting your people, but just like being aware of your own boundaries and needs and just being like really caring for yourself and your team.
I feel like you're speaking to me at the moment. So thank you. I needed that today.
Allison speaks that to people. It's one of her gifts.
Thank you for that very personal reminder.
Yeah. Well, I think I might have already given the answer away earlier. Being a leader is you belong in the space. If you're a leader, you are there for a reason. And so be okay with that. And just your team is looking to you for motivation and, just to be the safe, like the one driving. And, leaders with a vision, I've always been so appreciative of that when I see that. And it's really important. Why we're doing it, you're saying that people can really follow along on that and be okay. Kind of what's happening down the path of confusion and chaos, sometimes bumps in the road and all those things. So it's really motivating to your team. Be okay leading the team, I guess, just say, I'm here for a reason. Yeah.
Yeah. That like quiet confidence is so important. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I think impact, right, on projects, it doesn't come, I think what we all know, right, is it doesn't come from activities alone. It doesn't come from checking the box or going through a checklist, right? It comes from kind of intentional structures, shared accountability, shared measures, and healthy teams, right, that stay connected even as things swirl or change around them. And that's just what I would leave us with today. And thank you both for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to be here with you today, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time.